My family confessed I was born just to be my brother's caretaker. Years later, they come back begging for money for his legal problems. But my answer left them broken and speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work in digital marketing for a tech company, and I basically just told my parents that I'm not giving a single cent for my brother's legal problems. And honestly, I don't regret it one bit. I know that sounds harsh, I know. But let me tell you the whole story, because when you finish reading this, you're going to understand why I got to this point. The thing is that my whole life, literally since I can remember, I've been invisible in my own family, and it's not an exaggeration or anything dramatic, it's simply the truth. Ryan is my older brother. He's 31 now, and he was diagnosed with ADHD when he was like 6 years old, I think, or maybe 7. I'm not completely sure. From that moment, everything in our house revolved around him, his needs, his tantrums, his problems. I was born when he was 3 years old, and I grew up thinking that's how a normal family was, you know, where one child gets all the attention and the other one just exists in the background. My parents were always dealing with something related to Ryan. There was always a new therapy, a new medication, a new strategy to manage his behavior. And I was there, being the quiet girl, the girl who didn't cause problems, the girl who understood that Ryan needed more attention because he had a condition. But the truth is that Ryan didn't just have ADHD, he was a bully, and my parents never did anything about it. I remember perfectly when I was like 8 years old and he was 11. He would push me against the walls, take my things and hide them or break them, and when I cried and told my parents, they would tell me I had to be more understanding, that Ryan couldn't control his impulses, that I was the younger sister and had to learn to give in. Can you believe it? They were basically telling me to accept the abuse because my brother had a medical excuse to be a jerk. And it wasn't just with me. With other kids at school, it was worse. But my parents always defended him, always found a way to justify his behavior. My birthdays were a nightmare, each and every one of them. Ryan found a way to ruin them, without fail. I remember my 10th birthday. My parents had organized a small party at home with some friends from school. Nothing fancy, but I was super excited, because it was the first time I had a party like that. Well, turns out Ryan decided that day he was going to have one of his worst tantrums because he didn't like the cake they had bought. Like, it wasn't even his birthday, but he wanted everything to be his way. He ended up throwing the cake on the floor, yelling at my friends, and my parents had to end the party early to calm him down. I stayed in my room crying the rest of the day, and my parents never apologized. They just said Ryan had had a bad day and that I should understand. That happened over and over, year after year, until I simply stopped wanting to celebrate my birthdays. Christmas was the same, or worse. Ryan always got more gifts, more expensive gifts, and, if I got something he wanted, he made such a scene that my parents basically forced me to share it or straight up give it to him. Once they gave me a new bike. I was like 12 years old and I had asked for that bike all year, and Ryan decided he wanted it. My parents told him no, that it was mine, but he got so hysterical that in the end they bought him one just like it but better, and also told me I had to let him use mine whenever he wanted, because it would be selfish not to. I would just stand there thinking, seriously? Seriously, do I have to share my Christmas gift with the guy who makes my life impossible? But I didn't say anything because I had learned it was no use. When I turned 13, something happened that still makes me angry when I think about it. My parents had promised me a special trip, just the 3 of us, to Disneyland. I had never asked for anything like that, but that year, they had said that since I was starting middle school and had gotten excellent grades, they were going to give me that gift. I was super excited, honestly, because it was going to be the first time I did something special just with my parents, without Ryan ruining everything. Well, 2 weeks before the trip, Ryan found out and obviously wanted to go. My parents told me he wasn't going to be able to come, that this was my special trip. But Ryan threw such a tantrum, screamed so much, broke things in the house, that in the end my parents gave in and said he had to come because they couldn't leave him alone and there was no one else who could take care of him. The trip was horrible, I'm not going to lie. Ryan complained about everything, wanted to leave each attraction early, got angry if we had to wait in lines, and my parents spent the whole time trying to keep him happy instead of, enjoying the trip with me. There was a moment when we were in line for Space Mountain, which was the attraction I most wanted to ride, and Ryan decided he wanted to leave. My parents told me we had to go because Ryan was uncomfortable, and I exploded. I told them this was supposed to be my trip. Why did it always have to be about Ryan? And my mom told me I was being selfish and dramatic. I walked away alone through the park crying, and they caught up with me like an hour later, angry at me for having walked away. They never apologized, never acknowledged that they had ruined something that was supposed to be special for me. The following years were more of the same. Honestly, I became more and more quiet, more withdrawn. Spent most of my time in my room or at friends' houses when I could. My maternal grandparents, who lived in another state, were the only ones who seemed to really see me, who noticed what was happening. Every time I visited them, they treated me as if I mattered. They asked me questions about my life, about school, about what I liked, and that meant everything to me. My grandparents saw how my parents treated me and didn't agree with it. I know because once, I heard my grandmother arguing with my mom about it, telling her they were hurting me, but my mom just defended herself, saying I didn't understand how hard it was to raise Ryan. When I turned 17 and was in my senior year of high school, I knew I had to get out of there. I started researching universities that were as far away from home as possible, literally across the country. My parents assumed I was going to go to the local university so I could keep living with them and, obviously, helping with Ryan. But I had other plans. I applied secretly to several universities on the East Coast, asked for all the scholarships possible, worked part-time to save money, and basically prepared my escape. My grandparents helped me a lot with this. They supported me with the applications, with the recommendation letters, with everything I needed. One day in the spring of my senior year, I was having dinner with my parents and Ryan, and the topic of college came up. I told them I had been accepted to a university in New York with an almost full scholarship and that I was leaving. The reaction was, well, it was worse than I expected. My mom started crying. My dad got really angry. And Ryan was there looking at me as if I had personally betrayed him. My dad told me I was selfish. How was I going to abandon my family like that? That Ryan needed me. I just stood there processing those words. Like, Ryan needed me? For what exactly? And then my mom said something I'm never going to forget. Something that completely changed how I saw my life and my family. She told me, with tears in her eyes but completely serious, that the reason they had decided to have a second child, meaning me, was specifically so that Ryan would have someone to take care of him when they couldn't anymore, that was my purpose, my role in the family. She said it like that, literally. As if it were the most normal thing in the world to tell your 17-year-old daughter that she was basically conceived to be her older brother's caretaker for the rest of her life. I was in shock. I don't know, like 5 minutes without being able to say anything. Everything started to make sense suddenly. All those years of being ignored, of my needs not mattering, of having to sacrifice everything for Ryan. It had all been part of a plan. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a long-term solution to the problem of what was going to happen with Ryan when they got older. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Like my whole life had been a lie. I asked them if they had ever loved me for myself, if they had ever seen me as anything more than Ryan's future caretaker. And my dad told me of course they loved me, but I had to understand my family responsibilities. That night, I called my grandparents crying and told them everything. My grandmother was furious. She told me to pack my things, that they were going to help me leave, that I didn't have to stay in that house one more day if I didn't want to. I spent the next few weeks basically avoiding my parents, finishing high school, preparing to leave. My parents tried to make me feel guilty constantly. They told me I was a bad daughter, that I was being immature, that I was going to regret it. Ryan didn't even talk to me. He just looked at me with resentment every time he saw me. The day I left for college, my grandparents came to pick me up. My parents didn't even come out of the house to say goodbye. And honestly, I didn't care. I got in my grandparents' car with my suitcases and didn't look back. Literally. That was the last time I was in that house, like 10 years ago now. My parents told me before I left that they weren't going to give me a single cent for college since I was making this decision, and they kept their word. But I was prepared for that. I had my scholarship, my savings, and I knew I could work. College was hard. I'm not going to lie. I worked like 25 hours a week besides studying full-time. But it was the first time in my life I felt like I was living for myself. You know? Nobody was telling me I had to sacrifice my plans for Ryan. Nobody was making me feel guilty for wanting to have my own life. I made amazing friends, studied what I liked, had boyfriends, had fun, basically did everything a normal person does in college without having to worry about an abusive brother and negligent parents. My grandparents kept me updated on what was happening with my family from time to time, although I didn't ask much because honestly I didn't want to know. Apparently, Ryan kept living with my parents, had tried to work a couple of times but never lasted long at any job because he couldn't handle authority or following basic rules. My parents kept doing everything for him, justifying his behavior, and according to my grandparents, it was getting worse and worse because they no longer had the excuse that he was a child. He was an adult over 20 years old, acting like the world owed him something. I graduated from college with honors, got an amazing job at a tech company, moved to a nice apartment in the city, and basically built the life I always wanted. I didn't talk to my parents that whole time, like 6 full years without any contact. They knew where I was because my grandparents told them, but they never tried to contact me. I guess they were too busy with Ryan, or maybe they were waiting for me to be the one to give in and come crawling back. About 2 months ago, Ryan did something that finally had real consequences. Apparently, he had been harassing some kids in the neighborhood, following them, taking pictures of them without permission, yelling weird things at them, basically behaving in a super disturbing way. The parents of those kids complained to my parents several times, but my parents, being my parents, didn't do anything about it. They just said Ryan had problems and that the neighbors had to be more understanding. Well, one of the dads got fed up and called the police, and when the police arrived, Ryan got aggressive with them, pushed them, screamed, made a whole show, and ended up being arrested. My grandparents called me to tell me what had happened, and honestly, my first reaction was like, finally, you know? Finally, someone was holding him accountable for his actions instead of just patting him on the head and telling him everything was fine because he had ADHD. I didn't feel bad for him, not at all, because this was something I had been expecting to happen for years. I knew that eventually his behavior was going to cross a line that not even my parents were going to be able to justify. What I didn't expect was that 3 weeks after that, I would receive an email from my mom. It was super weird because she had never tried to contact me in all these years, and suddenly there it was, a long email explaining the situation with Ryan, saying he needed specialized therapy, that he needed a lawyer for the legal case, and that all of that cost a lot of money. And at the end, the real reason for the email, she was asking me for financial help. She was asking me to contribute to Ryan's legal and medical expenses because, according to her, I was also his family and had a responsibility towards him. I read that email like 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was reading. This woman, who told me 10 years ago that I had been conceived only to take care of Ryan, who didn't talk to me or support me in anything during all these years, who let her son bully me my entire childhood, was now asking me for money. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what they did to me, just a demand for money. Because apparently I still had that family responsibility. She had decided I had. I responded to the email that same night. I told her no, that I wasn't going to give a single cent for Ryan, that it wasn't my responsibility to fix the problems they had created by not setting boundaries and consequences for his behavior all these years. I told her that the fact that she contacted me only when she needed money, and not at any point in the last 6 years, and said everything I needed to know about what kind of mother she was. I told her that Ryan was her problem, not mine, and that I had built my life away from them specifically, so I wouldn't have to deal with this kind of situation. My mom responded with another long email, saying I was selfish, cruel, that I was turning my back on my family in their time of need, basically trying to make me feel guilty, like she had always done. But this time it didn't work. I'm not that 3-year-old girl anymore who felt bad for wanting something for herself. I'm a 8-year-old adult who has worked hard to build her own life, and I'm not going to let them manipulate me into going back to being what they wanted me to be. My dad also tried to contact me after that. He called me on the phone. I don't know how he got my number, but I guess my grandparents gave it to him thinking maybe it would help us reconcile, or something. The conversation was short because he basically told me the same thing as my mom, that I had to help, that he was my brother, that family helps each other. I asked him if he had thought about that when they decided my only purpose was to be Ryan's caretaker. If he had thought about family when they let me deal with Ryan's abuse my entire childhood without doing anything. He was quiet for a moment and then told me I didn't understand how hard it had been for them, and I told him that they hadn't understood how hard it had been for me either. I hung up and blocked the number. According to my grandparents, who still maintain contact with my parents although they don't approve of anything they do, Ryan ended up with a public defender because my parents couldn't afford a private one. The judge ordered him to attend mandatory therapy and gave him a restraining order so he wouldn't get near those neighborhood kids. My parents are furious with me for not helping. They've told everyone in the family that I'm a bad daughter, that I abandoned them when they needed me most. All that victim narrative they've always had. Some relatives have contacted me to tell me I should reconsider, that at the end of the day, he's my brother. But most of the people who really know me, who know what I lived through, support me completely. My grandparents told me they're proud of me for maintaining my boundaries, that it's not easy to say no to your family, but that sometimes it's necessary to protect yourself. My grandmother told me something that stuck with me. She told me that love doesn't mean accepting anything they do to you, that it's okay to distance yourself from people who hurt you even if they're your family, and that I don't owe anything to Ryan or my parents after everything that happened. Now, I'm at a point in my life where I finally feel like I'm free. You know? I have my job that I like, my friends, I'm dating someone who's amazing and who treats me well, and I'm planning a trip to Europe next year. Something I always wanted to do. For the first time in my life, I don't have to think about how my decisions are going to affect Ryan. I don't have to sacrifice what I want for someone else. And that feels incredible and terrifying at the same time. Sometimes I feel guilty. I'm not going to lie, because that's how they raised me, to feel responsible for Ryan. But then I remember everything that happened, and I know I did the right thing. Last week, I was having dinner with a friend, and I was telling her all this, and she asked me if I ever thought about trying to fix things with my parents, maybe in a few years when all this calmed down. I told her honestly I didn't know, that part of me misses the idea of having a family, but that the reality is I never really had that. What I had was an assigned role in a toxic family dynamic, and there's nothing to fix there. You just have to accept that's how things are and move forward. Maybe someday my parents will realize the damage they did to me, maybe not, but that's not my problem anymore. I did my part trying to survive my childhood. Now it's my turn to live my life, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.